Hey everyone. So I'm back to talk about more aspects involving Jupiter because I've been on a bit of a Jupiter kick lately, if you've seen any of my recent videos. So in this video, I want to talk about aspects between the Sun and Jupiter in the birth chart. So I want to start off with a general overview of aspects between the Sun and Jupiter. There are a lot of similarities between these aspects. With Sun and Jupiter, this links someone's identity and their sense of self and how they see themselves and how they want to be seen by others with Jupiter, which would be their sense of optimism and hope in life. The broader belief system that they hold to give them a sense of meaning or purpose in life. Their identity and that belief system, that Jupiter outlook, are linked together. All the aspects enhance someone's confidence, and they generally have a positive view towards themselves and a desire to expand oneself. So the identity really wants to shine when it's in aspect to Jupiter. They generally want to be seen and noticed, especially for the things of Jupiter. So that's being somebody who is wise, or being like an entertainer, being somebody who's funny, or being somebody who's giving or generous, or a leader, or a very just person, somebody knowledgeable, somebody who can teach others. And generally, they're very enthusiastic as well, but that same enthusiasm can drive them to excess, especially excesses in drinking or shopping, money, gambling, food, partying, or wanting attention, like always wanting more recognition. And it can also lead to some kind of restlessness, like always being on the go, always exploring, always being on the search for more knowledge, more truth, and never really feeling like they fully know themselves because there's always more to learn about themselves and about life in general. But that search in itself is what excites these people the most. It's what gives them enthusiasm in life. It's what gives them that spark for creativity, for creating themselves, and gives them passion in life. Because the identity is linked with the beliefs, the identity can then change as the beliefs do, and vice versa. The particular aspect that is occurring between the Sun and Jupiter in a birth chart shows how that process is gonna unfold with the identity and the beliefs changing. Easy aspects show that there's no conflicts between these two in that regard. So the identity itself is easily linked with Jupiter, with that Jupiter meaning, the Jupiter beliefs, and their sense of morality. These people may not notice the excesses that they engage in more, or it might just not be causing problems in their life, so it's not as crucial to try to work out. People with the easy aspects do tend to be more likable than people with the hard aspects, and we'll talk about why when we get to the hard aspects. I want to start off with the conjunction, and I'm going to talk about the conjunction with both the easy and the hard aspects because the conjunction has probably the most similarities between the two groups. So the conjunction is the purest expression of what Sun and Jupiter mean when they're together. This is actually a very warm placement because the Sun gives that warmth to Jupiter, and Jupiter expands the light of the Sun in that person's chart. It gives a kind of brightness to the chart, almost like a star factor, or at least the desire to be seen as one or to become one in their life. People do tend to notice people with Sun Jupiter aspects, but especially the conjunction. They tend to have people gravitate towards them because, again, it's like that warmth and that light is enhanced in the personality. Especially if it's in certain houses, like the fire or the air houses, they tend to be more noticeable, or maybe the 10th house too. So easy aspects between Sun and Jupiter can go a long way to help someone's self-esteem in their birth chart, especially if they have hard aspects that show their sense of self-worth or their self-esteem is a challenge for them to solidify in their life. The easy aspects between the Sun and Jupiter, so that's the sextile, the trine, and the conjunction, those can go a long way to really help somebody still have this underlying basis of confidence or optimism in their outlook and in their perception of themselves. Now, the conjunction especially is pretty confident because this is pure Sun Jupiter stuff. There's a humanitarian quality to the conjunction. their search for themselves and their self-growth and their development involves exploring broader social groups. They tend to want to give their light and their life to people because, again, it's expanded. And Jupiter is a social planet. It involves like cultures and social groups. It's still involving understanding different points of view. They also can be really funny. Sun Jupiter people can be really funny in general and just kind of like exaggerate their humor. The conjunction is more like good humored. It's kind of like a good natured, fun spirit. They also are very generous. Again, generous with their energy, their life, because it's their sun, their life force, their vitality. They tend to want to give of themselves. They can still struggle with overindulgence because, again, fulfilling their Jupiter is part of how they want to be seen. For some Sun Jupiter people, there can be a material excess as well. You see that more with the harder aspects, but the conjunction, again, can still struggle with that as well. They do like to be seen as a leader, but not a selfish one. Because their identity is linked with their Jupiter growth, out of all the aspects, this is probably the one where you see the most growth because the conjunction shows like a readiness to embrace change in life. They embrace change within themselves because in a way they're always searching for themselves in what they explore, what they learn. It's like all of what they learn is immersed with their view of themselves. So it's not a stagnant identity, and these people might actually even fear stagnation. Unless there's something in the chart that makes the personality more serious, they're not as free-spirited. You have to look at everything. But for the most part, they embrace their beliefs changing or their identity changing because that keeps them growing. And with the conjunction, it's also hard for them to separate their identity from their beliefs. Because again, they're connected to each other and they're so closely linked that it's hard for them to not view themselves within the context of their Jupiter outlook or their Jupiter beliefs, and vice versa. It's hard for them to not involve themselves personally when it comes to developing that Jupiter belief system. Whatever they currently believe or are pursuing in their growth, their knowledge, their exploration, it'll tell you about how they're currently viewing themselves. If they don't have a belief system to link with their identity, then that can create some issues. But you see that more with the hard aspects. But again, the conjunction can still have that experience, especially if there's other harder aspects mixed with the conjunction. That process of the identity with the beliefs can be good or bad. It just depends on how the individual is choosing to act it out. But for the most part, people with the conjunction can maintain an open outlook. Now I want to talk about the trine. So people with the trine between the Sun and Jupiter don't act on changes as much. They just kind of accept their views or their beliefs as they come, or any kind of beliefs that they have don't cause them issues because they're not like acting against themselves. So it's not as much of a pure focus on growth like it is with the conjunction. It's more just growing with experiences as they come, whereas the conjunction is actively looking for those experiences. It's more go with the flow than the conjunction. It's less restless, and the trine can actually be more lazy and gluttonous because they're more just about enjoying life and just simply being optimistic. There's not a lot of like issues there. The sextile is probably the only exception to the theme of having a hard time separating themselves from their beliefs. Because with the sextile, Jupiter and the Sun assist each other. So how Jupiter wants to seek that growth and that abundance just naturally supports the Sun and how the Sun wants to express itself. So when the Sun does want to shine with the sextile, that Jupiter exploration can be almost utilized in a way that can help the Sun expand itself in its expression. And that exploration and that development of the beliefs also helps the Sun to develop its self-expression. When there's hard aspects between the Sun and Jupiter, the link between the identity and the belief system is in conflict. With the hard aspects, the square, the opposition, and the inconjunction, this is where you see more excess and more overindulgence. So the ego itself can be excessive, and they generally struggle more to integrate their identity and their sense of self with their belief systems. it's harder for them to understand how they fit into a given cultural context, because they can struggle to identify their own sense of morality and then really acting that out. So you could see more issues of not practicing what you preach with the hard aspects. At their worst, like at their very worst, again, this is not for everybody, but in like the most extreme negative side of this is where you can see people whose ego is just overly excessive. So there can be like kind of a con artist type of persona, or false prophet, greedy salespeople who want to like sell you some kind of like story or narrative or truth. People who want abundance just for the sake of having it all, but they're also being selfish about it. So I want to talk a little bit about each aspect. The opposition and the inconjunction usually have very big personalities. Like they might be very expressive or somehow demand a lot of attention. Even if they don't directly like ask for your attention, their presence demands to be seen. Some may be more subtle about it at first. It just depends on like the sign and the houses and other aspects to it. But others can overdo it. And it can even cause like a kind of social reaction where people kind of question them. They still can be funny, like people can still find them funny, but they're definitely more bold in their humor than people with the conjunction, the sextile, or the trine. And they can even do things that can be kind of outrageous. And there's also, again, with the opposition and the inconjunction, a desire to be seen as abundant in whatever kind of qualities their sun wants or Jupiter wants. But especially I've noticed with the hard aspects, a lot of times this shows up as them wanting to be seen as wealthy or just having a certain popularity to them. Now with the inconjunction, it's interesting because they can struggle a little bit more with guilt for being selfish or not following their own beliefs. So they can kind of go back and forth between that like overly abundant selfishness, but also then going back and feeling guilty for that. Now with the square just shows that there's a tension between how they currently see themselves and that understanding that they have that there's still more to learn about themselves and in life in general. Now, with all the hard aspects, this goes for the opposition, the inconjunction, and the square, there can almost be an avoidance of the self in a way. Maybe not so much an avoidance of the self directly, but at least an avoidance of aligning the self-expression with their beliefs. The square is more aware of this theme in the hard aspects between Sun and Jupiter, but that avoidance, what it might be, what I've seen, is that it's almost like an avoidance of learning more or expanding their knowledge or their current understanding or their views, because it's like they don't want to lose that idea of who they are or a current view of themselves as somebody who has it all. Because again, that would require them to look at their beliefs and themselves and figure out what needs to change between both of them or within one of them. People with the hard aspects might still have that fear of not growing like the conjunction does, but they can also have an even harder time letting go of old beliefs. And the conjunction is more likely to embrace something new. So with the hard aspects, letting those beliefs go can actually cause more issues. It's harder for them to integrate new perspectives into their identity. So again, that process of growing in what you learn about life and then how that feeds back into how you grow and develop your idea of yourself, that's where they're most challenged with the hard aspects, especially with the square, because they might want to be seen one way, but they might believe something different. Again, it's different from the conjunction where usually their beliefs and their identity are the same. And with the hard aspects, they're different. And that's what the conflict is. So you can sometimes see people with the hard aspects overcompensate for that fear that they haven't grown or developed enough or achieved or learned enough by enlarging their ego and again acting as if they have it all. And again, the inconjunction, while they might do this as well, they can probably struggle with more guilt in doing this. Just like with the conjunction, the hard aspects can also struggle with a general restlessness. But this restlessness doesn't always show up physically, because it's not like Sun-Mars aspects or Mars-Uranus aspects where that restlessness really shows up physically. It can show up physically, especially if it's in certain houses, like the first house. But it can also be a more mental restlessness, or it's almost like a pervasive feeling of FOMO, like the fear of missing out. It can show up in people who are on the other end of that struggle with letting go of beliefs, where like these individuals, they don't necessarily have a hard time letting go of old beliefs. It's more like the struggle is that they're always searching. It's like this restlessness keeps them moving, it keeps them traveling, it keeps them exploring. It might keep them changing their identity, or like always questioning how they view themselves. And it's interesting because they think that they're searching for something external, or searching for an experience that is gonna finally like give them that insight or that understanding of who they really are. If you look beneath that, really they're on a search to discover the truth of who they are. So with the hard aspects, and the conjunction can struggle with this too sometimes, it's sometimes good to just rest with what you know about yourself and know that your experiences have shaped you, but you have also shaped your experiences. So they're not always separate, or they don't always need to be. But again, the birth chart shows our perceptions of things. So the individual is struggling with perceiving them as being separate and not being able to be integrated. But they can be. That action alone that people take to explore when they have aspects between the Sun and Jupiter, that in and of itself says something about what drives your spirit. Because again, your Sun is like your overall core expression. So that enthusiasm to explore or to learn says something about who you are. So at their best, these people are very forgiving and accepting of others and generous with their energy. Again, there's a humanitarian quality to them, so they can be very inspirational and motivational. They can even be kind of enlightening because they like to teach other people what they learn, and again, they can be very funny and entertaining. And those with the hard aspects are learning to develop these traits in a more honest and genuine way. Not in a way where they're acting out these characteristics to overcompensate or to feed their own ego, but it's because it's genuinely who they really are. And with all the aspects between Sun and Jupiter, it's just important to remember to not let your ego get too blown up, especially with the hard aspects. But again, even the easy aspects can overdo it sometimes as well. They can be overindulgent, especially for all the aspects. You have to watch for not developing a God complex or grandiose beliefs about yourself, especially if even the easy aspects are mixed with other aspects that might promote that in the chart, because that bubble will eventually burst, and then these people can find that they haven't really been growing. They've just kind of been inflating like a balloon, but within that isn't something solid. So you just want to make sure that you're developing a true and honest character. I hope that this helped you understand aspects between the Sun and Jupiter. Let me know what your experiences have been if you have any of these aspects, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.